And thanks everyone again for joining today's Pathlock webinar. My name is Isaac Kimmel. I'm a senior solutions engineer for Pathlock. I've been in the SAP security and compliance space since 2005. Let's have a look at the agenda for today's webinar. So this is really going to be a strategy session discussing the ability to identify user access risk, compliantly provisioning access, and automating user access reviews across not only the traditional SAP ERP, but also cloud applications using SAP Access Control. Now, in addition to that, you may have a requirement to provide elevated access management, or sometimes called firefighter type of access, for Workday or other cloud applications. And I'll be showing you how Pathlock can help support that. This firefighter or EAM elevated access management functionality is not provided as an extension of SAP Access Control. However, Pathlock does provide this type of emergency access for the cloud applications like Workday through our own Pathlock UI, which I'll be showing you later on in the webinar. Finally, I'm going to talk about your SOD and critical access monitoring strategy, and really the ability to manage user risk across multiple business applications. It's going to be a key requirement for your organization very soon, if it's not already. So first, a look at SAP Access Control and some of those core capabilities. So SAP Access Control, very robust solution. You know, if you've got it working and deployed for you, it's probably been deployed with robust workflows, and your business users have been using it oftentimes to request and approve SAP access, and it helps you get that right access governance that allows you to comply with access audits or reviews for your SAP ERP or SAP ABAP systems. Now, one important issue with access control was that a while back it didn't really have a roadmap to continue on after version 12 reaches its end of life. But of course, now there is a plan for SAP Access Control after version 12. The SAP Solution Management and Development teams announced a new release for the SAP GRC platform planned in Q1 of 2026. And this SAP GRC edition for SAP HANA will be the successor solution they've announced for GRC 12. And if you're one of the thousands of companies, right, who have invested heavily in your access control deployment, SAP heard you that access control needed to stick around and certainly be a part of the long-term vision and roadmap there. So what are we really going to talk about today? It's that the old ways of access, application governance, risk control can't sustain in a modern environment. So modern enterprises and organizations need robust user access governance, but now you're probably dealing with hybrid environments with both on-premise and cloud applications, and often those applications, different best-of-breed business cloud applications, will have, of course, completely different security models. So this really drives the need for automation of user access risk reporting and compliant provisioning to keep business applications outside of just a singular ERP system. So when we talk about the challenge, the identification of user access risk, you know, in the good old days, so to speak, access control could simply monitor all the users and risk. And this was because all the users and risk were managed with SAP Access Control for the security authorizations specific to SAP ERP, whether it was ECC or S4. So again, in the kind of typical past challenge, it was just really around identifying the access risk as illustrated here, where, for example, a user had part of the risk, part of the conflict in the SAP system, and then the other side of the risk, like the invoice payments, was also within that same SAP ERP system. So of course, we've been able to do this type of user access risk analysis for a long time, and the authorization concept is the same, of course, because it's within one SAP ERP system. Now, looking at some examples, right, of the kind of classic SOD risk conflict definitions, the different business functions when they're contained within one ERP system. So whether your risk included functions for procurement or inventory, payables, assets, vendors, pricing, and so on, you're able to manage all of that consistently and effectively in access control. So you had your SOD or risk rule set either built by you, your implementation partner, or the one delivered with the access control solution. And then that one rule set was updated when you added custom transactions for purchase orders or additional PO document types, new inventory movement types, or maybe additional posting keys for financial transactions. So when the business introduced a change, again, it was in the one SAP ERP system. And hopefully you did have a group of business and IT people who agreed on which changes need to be made to your SOD or risk rule set. Now let's get into more what is the challenge facing organizations today and going forward into the future when we talk about identification of user access risk. So well before the move to SAP S4, organizations have been adopting different best of breed cloud applications. The two most prevalent business areas for adoption that we have seen are around procurement and also HR. So certainly many SAP customers adopted Ariba and SuccessFactors early on. Now, if they didn't adopt SuccessFactors, they would adopt a solution like Workday. So as these previously, core ERP activities started moving outside of the singular ERP system, it's left to security or compliance teams to adapt user access management to ensure the organization doesn't lose the level of compliance they enjoyed over the past decade or maybe even two. So these new challenges, must be accounted for, and that's what we're illustrating here. We have a HR risk or SOD conflict violation potentially being defined, and it's spanning across two different business applications. So for example, in Workday, someone has the ability, to maintain employee master data, but we're doing our payroll processing activities in our SAP S4 system. So this brings a lot of new challenges into the arena, Not only are typically the user IDs or accounts not going to be named the same, but a bigger challenge is that the authorization concepts, of course, are completely different, This is different vendors, different software solutions. So how do we actually address this to properly identify user access risk? So as these sensitive business activities like HR are moving fully or maybe partially outside of your one traditional ERP, and it could be partial because companies will phase the adoption of different features over different deployments. Now different business functions may be performed in various applications, and that's only going to continue to evolve over time. So again, if our organization is using Workday to create and maintain our employees, but the processing of payroll is still in SAP. This used to be all in one place, just likely within your SAP system itself. So how are we going to address this? And what's definitely not going to change, is the need to maintain compliance, the need to manage and report on user risk, in this case, in the HR process. So the risks here do not go away because of these changes. They've just become a little more complex to properly address. So when we talk about then the need to be able to analyze risk across multiple business applications, so if I'm the owner of SOX controls or SOD management or compliance or internal controls, how do I make sure that we don't start missing out on HR risks that we previously were able to pretty easily report on? We already had a process in place. Of course, we have different options, One option is we're just going to try to manage these risks manually through, ad hoc queries, spreadsheets, some sort of a manual process. A second option might be we're going to try to set up some sort of a kind of dummy process, including the creation of dummy roles to kind of, bridge the gap, so to speak there. Though that's probably going to be at a coarse-grained and relatively inaccurate level. Or finally, we could set up an additional connection from SAP Access Control to Workday and automatically pull the user data from Workday every time we run an ad hoc risk analysis, a batch risk report, or even risk simulation. So Pathlock can help you integrate Workday because we understand the authorization concept in Workday. So, what is the equivalent of the action and permissions or roles and transactions and authorization objects in SAP, so that we can ensure the risk reporting of a user who has the ability to main employee data in Workday and process payroll in SAP. Do they truly have the ability to do both of those activities? So with Pathlock, we can provide certainty with fine-grained and accurate results. So it's about being able to understand the access the users have in the different business applications, normalize that, and be able to do a proper, accurate, fine-grained comparison, especially when you talk about doing risk analysis and risk reporting. So that's great, but what about even more complex scenarios? So for example, we may have now or in the future a challenge around user access risk reporting and identification across 3 or more business applications. Point being here, of course, right, we need to have a strategy that works for today and tomorrow, meaning some sort of a consistent, repeatable approach that can be extended over time to end business applications. You do not want to have to start over or have siloed solutions as these challenges increase going forward and additional best-of-breed applications are adopted. So in our example procurement risk here, right now we've got 3 applications involved, not only our SAP S4 system, but Manhattan Warehouse and SAP Ariba. So of course, that's only adding to the complexity and to the challenge here. So just a color-coded example as it relates to SOD risk definitions and the underlying business functions, right? So if we do adopt a cloud warehouse management application, we're now seeing highlighted the risks that are going to span across multiple business applications with, again, completely different security models. So the challenge to accurately report cross-application risk will only continue to grow. And what about additional application adoption over time, from SAP or other vendors? Point being, this is not a temporary challenge, but the new reality for organizations. Now, with that foundation laid, the next set of slides are really going to go into the standard SAP access control screens here. So once the connection is completed between access control and, for example, Workday or Manhattan, everything you do related to rules, reports, and requests will still be in SAP access control. There's no process change for the business or new adoption curve at all. So these screens should look quite familiar. Here's a quick example, right? We're showing an SOD risk for Workday. Again, this is all within your existing SAP access control solution. There's no new place to go. We'll start getting into some of those permission rules here. And we'll still have the concept, right? We're seeing one of those functions, part of the SOD risk, in this case, representing the initiation of the settlement run for Workday. And then here we're seeing the other function, the other side of the SOD risk, so to speak, representing the completion of the settlement run. So a risk is a risk, right? But now we can track it across the different business applications, for example, SAP plus Workday. So that was a look at it more from the risk definition perspective, but of course you can also report on these SOD risks in the same manner that you are already used to. And what we've done, right, is really simply extend the scope to incorporate Workday or the other relevant applications. So the key there is having a unified single source of truth for your risk reporting. So you can see here, as we've already are used to, we can do our, of course, SAP risk reporting, but now we can also include Workday as a part of that. Now, for many organizations, the next key activity is around provisioning access to the users. So access request, or the joiner mover leaver process, JML as it's often called. Again, if you are already using that functionality within access control, this will be the same process your organization is already familiar with here. So as an example, here we are creating an access request for Workday, as you can see. So we're selecting our application. Now we're going in as part of our request process and requesting specific access. Again, in this case for Workday, it looks like the benefits administrator role is being requested here. And now we're about to finalize our request before submission. Now here we've submitted our access request for Workday. And the key point again being this request will go through your normal approval process that the business is already using. So whatever that existing process is today, right, the appropriate approval workflow will be followed. The approver, he or she, will be notified, and they'll be able to come in and review the request just as normal as it would be for the SAP access request, and of course make their decision, approve, deny decision on this access request. And another key point is that you still get all of the appropriate logging within SAP access control. So none of the logging or granularity is lost. It will still be tracked here. So we can see some information around payroll admin, benefit admin roles being added to our request. So all of that logging or history is still available. And if you're running your UAR or user access review process using SAP access control, again, you can then also perform these cross-application user access reviews or UARs within SAP access control as it makes sense there. So can extend that capability. And here's just a brief look again at a user access review example. Now, what about handling the firefighter or elevated access management EAM type of access for other business applications? So as cloud solutions are being adopted to run critical processes for your company, you may have a requirement to have a proper detailed process and automation process in place to manage this, again, firefighter privileged, or as we're calling it here, elevated access management. So for certain cloud apps like a Workday or Ariba, firefighters or this process can be initiated and managed through the Pathlock Cloud User Portal here, and that's what we'll have a brief look at today. So if we need to go in and say, you know what, I need to submit an elevated access management request here. So for our other business applications, besides your firefighter for SAP ERP process, that process can remain in place. But for our other business applications, we can submit these requests through the portal as you're seeing here. So when a user opens a request for elevated access, emergency access, the non-SAP application supported will be shown for selection. So we're seeing Workday illustrated here. And this process can remain very similar to your existing SAP ERP, firefighter, or EAM process. So we're going to select the system that we need elevated access for, the user ID, and of course the role or roles that we wish to have this temporary elevated access for. Access can be granted for only a few minutes or up to an unlimited number of hours, again, controlled and configurable by you and your team. And of course, upon approval, the access is assigned just for that limited duration. And Pathlock will then remove the access when that time limit has expired. And you would typically have some sort of a reviewer or EAM role owner receive a report on what the user has done for the proper review, sign off, and logging of anything they did during this duration when they had the elevated access. So in this particular example, you're seeing, okay, we're going to submit a Workday elevated access request for Jeremy Finn here. We said this is going to be needed for 2 hours. Again, you can have a configurable drop down here with 1 hour, 2 hours, 8 hours, whatever durations you'd like. And we're requesting that Jeremy be allowed to use the supplier administrator role in our Workday application. You'll notice some other documentation type fields as well. Again, those are configurable, and you can decide, of course, which fields are mandatory. So we can submit our request. Again, normally you would have that go through an approval process. And then Jeremy, once that access is approved, is going to automatically get the access assigned by Pathlock and be notified so he can go about his business. You know, if he's responding to an incident or ticket for the business, he can go perform those activities. Once the time is up, let's say the 2 hours are up, we automatically deprovision or remove the access, the elevated access from Jeremy. And then we would normally by default notify the reviewer or the appropriate person in the process at that time. Someone needs to take a look at, you know, what has Jeremy done with this elevated access active in the system. So we contact the reviewer. He or she is going to get an email and also a link. And they'll be able to go into their inbox here to take a farther look. So what are they going to see actually? So within their inbox for these elevated access requests, we can see the item here that is a pending review by the access owners. This session for Jeremy Finn for his Workday, again, elevated access. So very important really at the end of the day for any of the elevated access requests that have been approved to be reviewed again for what actually happened during the time period when the extra or elevated access was assigned. So let's open this one up in a little more detail. What would the reviewer, he or she, see? So if you are the reviewer, you're going to receive a notification and be able to come in and see all of these details in one place. So initially here, we're seeing the general request information, right? The request ID, the date, the system or application like Workday. This was opened by Carrie for Jeremy Finn here. We can see the requested access was the supplier administrator role. And then we're seeing some user details on who Jeremy is in our organization. He is a purchasing specialist. Now also for the reviewer and logged as part of this elevated access request, really important when you talk about your EAM request to be able to look at what did the user do with this elevated or emergency access active. So this log that we're seeing now for the reviewer is specific to EAM for Workday, and it's a very granular level, fine-grained level of information that we report to the log reviewer. So you're starting to see their date and timestamps, right? What Jeremy was doing during this time frame in our Workday application, and also changes that he made. So for example, changing supplier contact information. So giving the reviewer visibility into the details of what was done. Is this the expected behavior? Is this what Jeremy said he was going to do? Are there any concerns? It's critical to have this more detailed level of reporting available on the user's behavior. And then of course, even the EAM or firefighter type workflow history is closely tracked as well. So we can see when was this request initiated, it was approved by Tony, and then now again, it's at the last stage, it's waiting on the approval by the report approvers, the last sign off of the actual behavior that happened. And then of course, when we're ready as this reviewer, we can go through our approval or sign off process, leave comments, and then everything of course is permanently tracked within the Pathlock solution. So what we've seen here ensures that our EAM process or firefighter type of process for other apps like Workday is not only robust, but consistent and repeatable. So hopefully we've made it clear during today's webinar why it's so important to set your user access governance strategy early. Why is that so critical, especially as we adopt various business applications? It's really about having the ability to properly and accurately uncover risk across business applications, provision, review user entitlements, all of those functionalities within one single pane of glass or source of truth. Otherwise, a lot of organizations today are in a spot where the access management and risk reviews are being done all independently in different systems. So there's no visibility at all into cross-application risk SOD risks, for example, go undetected because everything is siloed and maybe even managed by different teams. So with SAP Access Control and Pathlock, we can solve these challenges to have that single pane of glass, produce accurate, fine-grained risk results, and extend the other capabilities that we've talked about today. So overall, it's about adapting to the new reality of these different business applications, all being in scope when we talk about application access governance. So being able to do proper risk analysis, automate the access or provisioning process, getting the right people the right access at the right time, have proper monitoring in place, especially when we talk about elevated access or firefighter management, and have everything tracked and logged, of course, appropriately, whether that's for risk analysis or your access requests across the different business applications. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today's Pathlock webinar. And with that, I will hand it back to Scott for any wrap up.
Awesome. Thanks, Isaac. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. You should be receiving it in probably the next 24 to 48 hours. If there are any lingering questions, Isaac has his email address up on the screen there. So we'd certainly encourage you to reach out to either Isaac, or you can send an email to info@pathlock.com. And of course, you can always submit a question on our website, pathlock.com. So I certainly thank you all for your time and attendance today, and we look forward to seeing you on another Pathlock webinar here in the future. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.